This is TLV1.
The Tel Aviv Review.
Hello and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review. I'm your host, Gilad Halpern. Every week we bring you conversations with authors about the books and research and other things that we like. And if you like us, please consider becoming a Patreon supporter. All you have to do is go to our homepage, that's tlv1.fm/Tel Aviv Review, scroll down to the bottom and click the big red button that says Patreon, click and support us. Some of you have been doing this for months and years, and we cannot thank you enough. This is the third episode in a series co-sponsored by the Sadie and Ludwig Kahn Chair in Jewish History at UCLA. And I am delighted to be joined, this time in the flesh, by Professor David N. Myers, who holds the Kahn Chair. Professor Myers is a distinguished professor of Jewish history, as well as the director of the UCLA Luskin Center for History and Policy. David, welcome back to the TLV1 studio, this time in the co-host seat.
Oh, it's great to be here again, Gilad.
Lovely. And we are now joined on the line from Berlin by Professor Amnon Raz-Krakotskin, who is professor of Jewish history at Ben-Gurion University of the Negev, specializing in religious and political thought in early modern and contemporary Judaism. His latest book is entitled Mishnah Consciousness, Biblical Consciousness, Safed and Zionist Culture. It looks at the city of Safed, Tzfat, in the Galilee, an important Jewish center for centuries, both as a reality and as a metaphor, offering a unique and alternative model to the more prevalent model presented by Zionism. The book was published last year in Hebrew by the Van Leeuw Jerusalem Institute Press, and we are now joined by Professor Amnon Raz-Krakotskin. Hello, and welcome to the show.
Hello, thank you very much. Very glad to be here.
I'm going to jump right in, and I'm going to take the liberty as co-host here in the flesh, as Gilad said, to refer to you not as Professor Raz-Krakotskin, but as the name by which you are universally known, No. So, No, great to see you. I want to begin at the beginning and ask you what prompted you to write this account, this revisionist account of the history of Safed. We know the classic studies of Solomon Schechter, Safed in the 16th century from 1908, and we know Gershom Scholem's iconic account of Lurianic Kabbalah in Safed from Major Trends in Jewish Mysticism, 1941. What brought you to this subject? What are the main differences from the existing approaches? And really, why Safed?
In fact, I will distinguish between the two famous scholars you mentioned, between Solomon Schechter and Scholem, and perhaps we'll turn back to Scholem later, because Scholem didn't write about Safed, but only about one aspect of Safed. Solomon Schechter, 1908, is the only scholarly composition dedicated to Safed. And that's what strikes me, in fact. I mean, it's not only him. It happened to me when I read another composition about Safed, composed by the third president of the State of Israel, Zalman Shazar. And I asked myself, when I read it, if so, how is it possible that Safed is totally absent from Zionist discourse, from the Zionist narrative of history, in fact, from modern narrative of history. In spite of Schechter's amazing work at the beginning of his essay, of his early essay, that follow, there can be little doubt that no place in Jewish history since the destruction of the Holy Temple could point to so brilliant a gathering of men, so great in their respective branches, so diversified in the objects of their study, and so united by the dominant thought of religion, as were attracted to Safed during the greater part of the 16th century. If so, what does it mean that it has no role in the historical narrative, in the collective memory, in the historical consciousness? It's particularly interesting when we think about Israel, because Zionist discourse insisted on the continuous existence of Jews, of Jewish communities in the land of Israel. And you would expect that a major plate will be one of the greatest moments in the history of the Jews in Eretz Israel, Palestine. Yet, it does not exist. There are many scholars, and we will turn back to Sholem, of course, for whom Luriani Kabbalah that was developed in Safed was a turning point in the history of Jewish mysticism. Nevertheless, Sholem do not mention any other aspect of Safed. Schechter and then Shazar were the only person who really discussed Safed until recently. As usual, I'm not the only one. There are few scholars who work today on Safed in a wider perspective, but it didn't exist. And that was the beginning of my thinking.
No. Can I ask you before we delve deeper into what Safed symbolizes? Can you tell us how did Safed become what it became? It was this remote town up on the hill. It's sort of in the middle of nowhere and became this vibrant Jewish center almost out of the blue. How did it happen? Was it just like the right people at the right place at the right time, or were there like other factors involved?
Well, it's the entire context of the 16th century. First of all, we have to remember that a community existed in Safed also before, a Mustarbi of Arab Jews that existed there before and in many aspects prepared the ground for the new development that happened in the 16th century. But as Schechter mentioned in this paragraph that I just wrote, in the 16th century, it attracted many scholars, many of them exiles from the Iberian Peninsula. And it was a whole mind who were welcomed by the Ottoman Empire. The development took place after the conquest of the land by the Ottomans during the reigns of the Sultans Selim and mainly Suleiman the Magnificent. So there is a real change in not only concerning Jews, but in the entire land. And there is a group of major scholars who gathered there, they were welcome to come there, and with the experience, many of them with the experience of the traumatic experience of expulsion or second generation to parents who were expelled from the Iberian Peninsula, although not only Spanish scholars. For instance, Ali was not Spanish, Ali and Rabbi Chaim Vital, but it was crucial. They brought with them two things, both technologies concerning the textile industry that they developed, and for us, most importantly, the Zohar and the tradition of the Zohar that was brought back to the Galilee. And Safed attracted them because Safed itself had no place in Jewish memory, but it's surrounded by the terms of the Tanaim, and mainly it's close to Meron, to the gravestone of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai.
I want to jump in here because you did mention antiquity and the Tanaim, and there's a kind of riddle that exists in the book that needs to be addressed. The subtitle of the book mentions Safed and Zionist culture. The title of the book is Mishnah Consciousness, Bible Consciousness. And it turns out that a major protagonist in your story is not just Safed and not just the Kabbalah and not just the Zohar, but the Mishnah. And I wonder if you can explain for us why you chose this title and what role the Mishnah plays in your story.
The Mishnah, is another story and tells you how I came to this topic. The Mishnah, as an autonomous book, as an independent book, did not exist almost did not exist until the 16th century. Only through its printing it became an independent, separated from the Talmud. The Mishnah usually, and continued, and also later, was not studied as itself. Now, in Safed, in fact, or maybe I say that at the middle of the 16th century, the publication of the Mishnah brought its appearance as a separate book distinguished from the Talmud. For Safed, the Mishnah is not only a text, it's a kind of an entity. The Mishnah, for instance, is a figure that was revealed to Rabbi Yosef Karo, one of the greatest, if not the most important rabbi of Safed at that period, when he was writing his canonical books, the Bet Yosef and the Shulchan Aruch. So the Mishnah, for them, the Mishnah is the context, is an essence. Together with it, reciting the Mishnah, reading the Mishnah, is a way that directs you to the Shekhinah on which we have to speak immediately. It is crucial in many of the rituals, reciting of Mishnayot. Today, we know about different occasions in which we recite Mishnayot, yes? But we should remember that all these rituals that are familiar to us today were developed in thought, were part of the things that were developed in thought. Because perhaps we should, first of all, say what happened in Safed. What is this great revolution on which Schechter spoke with us, yes? Who were these rabbis? How they transformed the Jewish culture? Why it is so important to think about Safed as the beginning of something, not as the end of something. Because you see, usually the historiography who deals with it regard it as another example of a traditional, though exceptional, but still traditional community. Because the distinction is between tradition and modernity. Yes? And Safed is part of the traditional world. But Safed is something that really reshaped the entire Jewish culture. When we think about the people in Safed, who are they? So I mentioned now Rabbi Yosef Karo, the author of the Shulchan Aruch, the Bet Yosef, whose composition indeed became the focus, the foundation of all Halachic discussion afterwards. We mentioned the Kabbalists, Rabbi Moshe Cordovero, and later Ha'ari and Chaim Vital, who not only changed the Kabbalistic thinking, it's not only a contribution to the Kabbalistic thinking, but it's a way that really reshaped the entire Jewish way of life, rituals, prayers.
But no. Can you perhaps expand a bit on the political dimension of it? But what do you mean by Mishnah consciousness?
I'll explain it, not only Mishnah consciousness, but also biblical consciousness. Because that's the title, Mishnah consciousness and biblical consciousness. I asked myself why Safed was so dramatically abandoned. What is the reason for this ambivalence towards such a moment in historiography and collective consciousness? And then I realized that Safed and Zionism represent two different models of Jewish existence in the land of Israel, in Palestine. One, they turn to two different moments in the history. Zionism is obviously biblical. The idea is that we turn to the biblical period, moreover, to the period between mainly Joshua and the Judges. Yes? Ben-Gurion saw himself as David as Yehoshua ben Nun. Zionism is a return to the Bible. Well, we should think, what is the Bible? The return to the Bible is also perceived as part of the return to the West, the return to history. It's the return to this moment in Jewish history. The moment from the conquest by Yehoshua ben Nun and continuously until in fact the temple, with an ambivalence towards the temple. But this is the story. This is the image, the Bible. The moment, the crucial moment for the Safadian rabbis is the moment of the Tanaim, is the moment after the destruction of the temple, is the moment in which after the destruction, when there is still a Jewish community in the land, the period in which the Mishnah is composed, and according to tradition, the period in which the Zohar was revealed to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and his colleagues and disciples. So the return is to this moment, the crucial moment, the most important revelation, according to the Safadian rabbi, in the history of the land, is the moment after the expulsion. They didn't turn back to the Bible. They thought it impossible. We have no access to the secrets of the Bible, but through the Zohar and the Mishnah.
So I want to jump in here and ask, how did they understand exactly the relationship between the Mishnah and the Zohar? Were they two facets of the same cultural, spiritual experience, moment, idea? And maybe you can draw out the relationship by also answering what happens to the Talmud if we look ahead, not behind, to the sort of the Zionist recovery of the Bible. There's obviously, these are people who are deeply committed to the practice and principle of Talmud Torah. What happens to the Talmud in their vision? And maybe you can use that as a way of addressing Mishnah and Zohar.
Let me concentrate in order to answer you on the figure of Rabbi Yosef Karo. Because, first of all, because he's not considered as a Kabbalist. And his yeshiva, of course, the Talmud was studied as traditionally. Namely, there is no distinction from the legal point of view of the Mishnah from the Talmud. This question is important because, interestingly, at the same period, if you want to see the different roads of the Mishnah at that moment, you have to remember that during the period, the 1550s, yes, the Talmud was banned in Italy, and the Mishnah was published. Namely, the Christian authorities permitted the Mishnah and considered it as an authentic composition, while denying, burning the Talmud. This is, of course, and since then there is indeed a history of the Mishnah, both by Jews and Christians in Europe. That is not the case in Safed, of course. From the sages of Tzfat, the Talmud is part of the tradition. This is exactly what distinguished Yosef Karo also from the Rambam in this sense. The idea is that he established his codification, his project of codification through gathering of all traditions, Talmudic and non-Talmudic. And in his yeshiva, the study was according to the Talmud. The Mishnah is crucial. You don't study the Mishnah. You don't study the Mishnah. You read it ritualistically. You never study. It's not a matter to study the Mishnah. You can study the Mishnah. The idea of Rabbi Yosef Karo was that if he will gather all the traditions, he may reach the real understanding of the Tanaim. But it's not simply to study the Mishnah. But so first of all, the Talmud exists in fact. Definitely. It's not a new sola scriptura.
Okay. It's not sola scriptura, but it is, the Mishnah becomes a sacred text
Yeah.
in a way that we have not seen before, such that you even say, as you mentioned once already, that it was revealed to Chachmei Tzfat, the sages of Tzafat. What does that mean, actually?
I can tell you. I think that what is interesting about this revelation of the Magid of Rabbi Yosef Karo is, first of all, think about it. It's the Mishnah, a woman, a feminine voice. The Mishnah does not tell Rabbi Yosef Karo how he should decide. She doesn't tell him how he should decide. She doesn't encourage him to understand that his halakhic decisions are crucial for the entire process of repair that is associated with the commandment, with the mitzvot. So the Mishnah is a kind of a vehicle that directs you. The main issue, we have to continue and think about the differences between Zionism, the Zionist discussion, and the Sephardian discussion, because it's crucial. Why they are attracted to come to the land, and mainly to the Galilee. They are attracted because of the belief that the Shekhinah, the lowest Sphira, the Sphira of kingdom, of Malchut, according to the Kabbalah, the Mishnah that according to the Zohar fell during the crisis of creation to the land, the Shekhinah is in exile in the Holy Land. And they come to the Holy Land. I don't think that the Holy Land is a concept they use. To the land of Israel, they come to the land in order to experience exile, because the Shekhinah is in exile. The Shekhinah, the idea of all of them, it was particularly discussed by in the Luzani Kabbalah, but also before Ari came. The idea is to take the Mishnah and to bring her back, to raise her from her exile and to bring her back to her husband, Kadosh Baruch Hu, or Sfirat Tiferet. Yes, so we have to think about this issue. The Mishnah, the question is whether the Mishnah is identified with the Shekhinah, or it's just a way through which you reach the Shekhinah. And the figure of the Shekhinah is crucial. By the way, I also don't know of any other example, before and after, not only of a feminine voice, but rituals that are all directed to the Shekhinah, to the feminine aspect of divinity.
No. Can I ask you to elaborate on the implications of that big change? Because you say that this whole model that Tzfat presents had influences way up to the 20th century and beyond, to Walter Benjamin, and of course it's a yardstick with which to measure the Zionist model that you pit against it. So other than the understanding of Jewish history and perhaps Jewish rituals, what does the Tzfat model present for the understanding of Jews as a collective, as a nation, as a people?
You can think about both European Jewish history, Eastern Europe, mainly Hasidism, without Sophocle, and you can think about Middle Eastern Judaism, mainly North African Jewry, that was established at the same period, without understanding the world of Sophocle. without understanding the difference, what happened in comparing to Western European modern history. Yes, that's in fact, when we talk about modern Judaism, we usually discuss the consciousness that is based on the negation of Tzfat. Both the halakhic project of Rabbi Yosef Karo, considered as stagnant, and the Kabbalistic project considered as Oriental hallucination, in a way. Yes, they are both denied through the construction of what we call modern Judaism, namely then the definition the religion according to the Protestant model of religion. The world of Safed, based on the system of mediation between the worlds, in which there is always access to divine voices, is crucial, both for Hafidism and for many Oriental Jews. So when we speak about Israel today, you can say that both models exist, and you can understand the tensions within Israeli society through the distinction between these models. The first model, on which secular Zionism was established, and is also crucial for religious Zionism. This is the biblical one. The biblical until today. Yes, this is something that, in fact, the role of the Bible in the secular society, in the secular cycle, has diminished in recent decades, but it's still there. Yes, being Bible and modernity against the exilic culture.
No, I want to jump in here. And point out a really interesting feature in the book, which readers of Hebrew, and we hope soon readers of English, when it's translated, will have an opportunity to see for themselves, which is that you see and present Safed, Tzfat, as resisting stark binary oppositions. You've hinted at some of them. It sort of resists the opposition between tradition and modernity. It resists the opposition between religious and secular, between East and West. And at the same time, your book is really built on what seem to be a series of historical and conceptual oppositions. So you've mentioned some of them: the Bible versus the Mishnah, Yehoshua ben Nun versus Rashbi, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, Zionism versus Galut. And I'm just wondering how you reconcile your understanding of Safed as resisting opposition and what seem to be very powerful oppositions in your own presentation.
So I'll try to answer you. First of all, I think my book is mainly self-reflection on Zionism. What is particularly Zionism? That's why it was so important to think about two models of Jewish settlement in Eretz Israel. Yes, I'm not talking about Zionism versus exilic diasporic model. Although Safed established its own diaspora, or maybe we should say it was part of the new Sephardi diaspora, whose center was in fact Thessaloniki at that period. So my main issue is to try to say, what is nationalism? What is it? Because it's very easy to distinguish. Zionism is a national modern project. Safed is a traditional project. But if you look, we see that you have here two political theologies, two different political theologies. So the way to look at my point of view, from my origins, yes, I was born into the biblical culture. Also personally, I dedicated the book to the memory of my mother, who was a Bible teacher for many years, a legendary Bible teacher. So I grew up indeed with the Bible, literally. But then to think, what does it mean, this biblical model, on different levels? And then through that to understand also the many aspects of denial. Yes, because why it is denied in that way? The denial of Safed. The denial of Safed is, for instance, the total denial and rejection of the culture of the pilgrimage to the Holy Grail Book. Yeah, the pilgrimage to Meron, to many other places. The denial, the art historic Gargus once identified it with murder of Palestinians or sexual harassment. And you ask yourself, why? What is that history? What is the difference between the concept of religion in Zionist culture and in Safedian? The main aspect here is perhaps the personal aspect. Yes, because in Safed, you go to these places for asking for personal salvation, marriage, health, etc., that are totally denied from the secular culture and also from the religious Zionist. Yeah, religious Zionist will not go to Meron; he will go to the doctor.
All right, I want to go back to the idea of exile and just remind you that about 30 years ago, a young Israeli scholar wrote an article called Galut Mitoch Ribonut, Exile Within Sovereignty, and ask you if this book that you've just written is in some ways the natural continuation of the argument that that young scholar, you, laid out in 1993. And if so, what is, maybe we can devote a little bit more time to asking, what is homeland exile? What is exile in homeland as opposed to a kind of diasporic version of exile? What does that mean? And is it actually a constructive and positive notion as distinct from others?
I don't think that often the Safedians throw it as a homeland. It was crucial. It was the land of Israel. Yeah. It's crucial, but the notion of homeland is already comes from the terminology of northern nationalism. I said it once, the difference is between Safed who will say, we belong to the land, because the land is identified with the Shekhinah. We belong to the land. We come to the land, want to experience the Shekhinah in the land, and to raise our mission as Jews to repair the world. That's something that we should come back to this. And the Zionists who say the land belongs to us. Yes, this is the difference. We belong to the land. We are part of it. It's not that we have to deny the history of land. We are part of it. We are part of its culture. When Rabbi Israel Najara, one of the greatest poets in Jewish history, part of this Safedian Renaissance, composed his poem, he used Arab and Turkish music for that. He used it. It's part of us. We belong to it. Yes, it's not the land belongs to us. It's like, what struck me that nobody mentioned before was the first sentence of the Bet Yosef, the most important composition in the history of Jewish halakha. Yes, Rabbi Yosef Karo, monumental volume from which he later edited a shortened version, not exactly, the Shulchan Aruch mainly. For the Bet Yosef, and there is a difference between these two compositions. The Bet Yosef is only for scholars. The Shulchan Aruch meant also for popular distribution. And in fact, the publication of the Shulchan Aruch, 1565, is indeed based on an amazing consciousness of Rabbi Yosef Karo to the invention of print, he understands that he wrote a bestseller. He knows what that it means. Yes, he understands that unlike, for instance, the Rambam or Rabbi Yaakov ben Asher, Arbat Turim, that in order to distributed. People had to copy. He sent it to Venice, and it will be immediately published in at least in 1,500 copies. And indeed, until the end of the century, it was published already in 20 editions, including since the 17th, the edition of the Ashkenazi Rabbi Ramah's notes on comments on the Shulchan Aruch. Remember, the first sentence of the introduction to the Bet Yosef says, Baruch ata Adonai Elohei Israel, asher bara et haolam letachlit ha'adam, ובחר בנו עם סגולה לקיים תורתו. Blessed be God who created the world for the entire humanity and chose us in order to, we are special, in order to practice the Torah. I don't have a better translation now. Maybe you will translate it better than me, but that's why I mentioned it in Hebrew before. But I think it's striking, yeah? Why? It's not apology. There is no enlightenment. Why the first line in a book that is, of course, exclusively for Jewish readers, nobody else needs this discussion, is starting with the sentence that the God of Israel created the world for the humankind. And then came the election of Israel for special. It also clarified the difference in the Messianic attitude of Safed and Zionism. For the Safed, redemption, the Jews are not simply the subject of redemption. Of course, they were thinking about their own exile and the condition of Jews elsewhere at that time, for instance, in Italy, when the Talmud was burned, as I said, and there was the process of Titoization. But the Jews are not, the redemption is not simply the redemption of the Jews, it's meaningless. Because for them, the Jews are the carriers of redemption. We have a mission here. If you want to bring back the idea that the Jews have, the idea is not Jewish sovereignty. I don't know if they were against Jewish sovereignty, of course. Don't misunderstand. I think that Karo would, I asked myself in the book, what would Rabbi Yosef Karo would say if he had sovereignty, political sovereignty? It would probably be a Jewish state for onset, for someone who starts in monumental book with such a declaration. With such a declaration, which is the which is not necessary.
So do you think it is your book, your analysis is a political analysis as well as scholarly? Do you think that there's any chance of turning it into a political project of any sort?
Perhaps, yes. For me, it's political. It doesn't mean that it can have any impact. Yes, for the moment, those who follow, if we look at what I say and the Israeli society today, you can say that the distinction between Israel Harishona and Israel Hashniya, is to a certain extent the distinction between Joshua and Rabbi Shimon. The biblical consciousness and the Tanaic consciousness. Does it mean, so if I'm saying that, it means that many of those who embody the Safedian culture today are part of the right wing. Yeah? Although you should remember that the main representatives of the biblical consciousness today are also part of the right wing, namely Smotrich.
Religious Zionism.
And the religious Smotrich declared that he is Joshua.
But the followers of The followers of Mishnah consciousness in its second Israel, right, in the right wing, perhaps predominantly Mizrahi constituency, they, in many ways, also subscribe to the binary distinctions and dichotomies that you describe in the Zionist model.
Of course. No, I don't think that here you will find the solution to all our problems and let's go back. Yes, I do think that that without thinking about many of Mizrahi Jews, you will never reach any change in the Israeli consciousness. They must be included. Yes, I'm talking as someone who do believe in a binational thinking as essential for any discussion of Israel-Palestine. But when I'm thinking like that, I also think about my Mizrahi brothers, and I also feel part of this culture. And so it doesn't mean that, first of all, it's not that you take the Safedian model and say, let's have the Safedian model instead. It doesn't work like that. It's dialectical. And we are speaking from a certain place. We are speaking from in a modern, therefore also biblical language. We are speaking from this terminology, and we have to think in a Safedian way. You mentioned Benjamin. How to bring back these ideas not as a critical activity, as a critical practice, self-critical, as a practice of self-criticism of our own. I'm mentioning of my own consciousness, and at the same time to establish a different way of thinking Jewish collectivity and Jewish history. Think about it. What will happen if we start writing the history of Jewish modernity from Safed? What will happen? What are the possibilities of such thing? I think about it in three different dimensions. First, inclusive Jewish history, because the history that defines modernity as the accommodation of Judaism to the Western model and identification with the allegedly secularized Christian West obviously deny the history of non-European Jews. This notion of modernity, if we start in Safed, we can have an inclusive history of the Jews, namely a global history that started there. The second aspect is letting Jewish history as a counter-history. The Jews who came to Safed were expelled from Spain. The expulsion of the Jews and the Muslims from Spain is considered by many scholars as a crucial moment in the development of the centralist and later centralist state and later nation state, the unified one. The idea that you have a unification, so you have to expel all those who do not belong to the Christian culture. The other thing is that also, if you think about Max Weber's idea of the disenchantment of the world, who started with Luther, denial of the idea of miracle, the possibility of divine intervention in the world, Safed provides an alternative model, one that emphasizes the existence of divinity in a very unique way, the existence of divinity in every life as part of our world. And third, it's also about the history of Palestine. I was really interested to notice the interest of many Palestinians in my work. At the beginning, I didn't know why. And then I realized, when we start the history in 1881, or definitely in 1948, we cannot have any shared history. If we started in the 16th century, you can see Jewish history with deep roots in Palestine, but in a way that also lets you write the history of the Jews as part of the history of Palestine. Because Jews, the paradox of Zionism is that in order to define the land of Israel as the Jewish national land, you have to deny the entire history. There is no history to the land in which we live. And when we come back to Safed, we can think about our land, the shared land, as a common one.
Okay, Professor Amnon Raz-Krakotkin, this was indeed a pleasure. Thank you very much for joining us to talk about your new book, Mishnah Consciousness, Biblical Consciousness, Safed, and Zionist Culture. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you both.
And many thanks to you, David, for coming on again.
Great to be with you, and no.
And to Itai Shelem, the manager of TLV1 Studios. And now we've got a request, because many or most of you listen to us on the Apple Podcasts app, and would like to ask you to please consider writing us a review of any kind. You too can support us by going to our website and subscribing onto our Patreon campaign. Check out our archive. It has something like 800 interviews. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and most important, join us again next week for another edition of the Tel Aviv Review. And until then, from us here in Tel Aviv, goodbye.